Can hear me now?
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Just so I'm clear, do you take the view, just to be clear on your position, do you take the view that non-whites, like in the United States, for example, that they cannot be racist?
So I think that's kind of an interesting question. The short answer, so on an individual level, right? I think the answer is almost certainly no. So like they can certainly be racist towards other non-whites. For example.
Okay, can non-whites be racist towards whites? Can individual non-whites be racist towards individual white people?
Yeah, so I think so. Right, like I think there could be a situation in which that occurs. However, I'm somewhat sympathetic to the argument that the racism, the racism of a non-white towards a white only can exist as a result of the non-white person's relation to whiteness, i.e. relation. And I know that's a really nebulous term, so I apologize for you already for using it. But their relationship to systems of power, which result in the privilege of white people. So, for example, right. So let's say there was a black person who owned a business and thought all white people were racist, and so wouldn't hire a white person. Right, so they could theoretically be racist towards a white person. They could have racial prejudice. They could have the power of owning that business and being able to discriminate against them and be racist towards them. However, it's the relationship to capitalism that gives them the ability to be racist. And so, I'm somewhat sympathetic.
Wait, hold on. So wait, are you saying in a non-capitalist environment that these individuals couldn't be racist?
Not at all.
They couldn't. So, okay, you're not saying that. Okay, so what are? Yeah,
I'm saying the system, the capitalist system, in that instance, is what relates or what gives the non-white the ability to be racist.
Okay, let me just get clarity on just because here's ultimately what I want to know. What I want to know is it possible for individual non-whites to be racist towards individual white people in the United States? Let's just say that, specifically in the U.S.
Yes, but again, I think it has to do with, or I should say, I'm sort of sympathetic to the argument that the reason that happens is because of the non-whites' relationship to whiteness.
Wait. Okay, hold on. So you don't actually hold the view that non-whites in the United States cannot be racist toward white people.
No,
that's not a view you actually hold.
I don't think so. Not on an individual level. No. If we talk like systems, institutions, that kind of thing, that may be a different story. But individual non-white people can be racist towards individual white people, but that's through their relationship to systems and institutions of whiteness, that of power, if you will.
Okay, so if someone were to say, so just to be clear, so if someone were to say, if someone were to say to a non-white person, like, you're being racist toward this white person, and they were to say, they were to reply by saying, I can't be racist toward this white person because I'm non-white and they are white, and racism is prejudice plus power, you would say that actually doesn't follow.
Yeah, on an individual level, I don't think that's like automatic. Now, I do think it's like really hard for a non-white person to be racist towards a white person. I think that the circumstances of that are pretty small, right?
And what are the necessary or sufficient criteria, whatever you can tell me, for a non-white individual to be racist towards a white individual?
Yeah, so I still ultimately think in my definition of racism, and we can kind of get into that at some point. If
well, we have to get. I mean, that's probably where we should start, because like you're saying, it's really hard, and I want to understand why it's hard. So we need to have a way of adjudicating. We need to have a way of adjudicating in this situation when on your view, if you're met with a non-white person doing something to a white person, how you would adjudicate whether they are racist or non-racist if you're going to say it's really hard. So what, on your view, does a non-white individual have to do to a white individual, and what relata need to be there such that I can adjudicate whether they're racist or non-racist?
Yeah, so it's going to come back to that prejudice, racial prejudice plus power. That's still going to be at the heart of it. So they have to have some power over the white person to kind of give them like a negative outcome, right? So the example I gave, like a black business owner who, right, like hated white people could be racist towards white people by not hiring them or not even like interviewing them for a job, would be an example.
Okay, so what do you mean by it's hard then? Like, what's hard about it?
Yeah, I don't think there's that many instances where it exists. I guess hard is probably the wrong word. Maybe rare is a better word.
Okay, all right, and that's so. Okay, so on your view, in order for an individual non-white to be racist toward an individual white, they would have to have the following: they would have to have some sort of prejudice toward the white individual, presumably on the basis of them being white.
So it would have to be on the basis of them being white. So to share an example I don't think would be racism is if there was a black cop who saw a poor white person in tattered clothes that they thought was probably like a crackhead or a meth head, and they stopped them for that reason. I think that would be more on the basis of the class of that person.
Right.
Just one.
Yeah. But if there was like, if there was a black individual, or we could just say non-white individual who saw a white individual, pulled them over on the basis that they were white, just hypothetically, let's say that happened, would that be racist on your view?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. Because you would say they have the conjunction of power and prejudice.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Okay. And power, and by power, I'm taking it to be this like nebulous term that there's like multifacets to it. Like it could be socioeconomic status, it could be money, it can be position in which they can enforce their will on others. There's various ways to have power.
Yeah. So this is power in the kind of, I guess, the sociological. I didn't study sociology, so I apologize if I'm bastardizing this, but in the sociological way, yeah.
Okay. Oh, wait, and what do you mean when you say sociological way?
So like power derived from, institutions, systems, hierarchies, that kind of thing.
Okay, but I just need a way of adjudicating then. Like what I'm trying to understand, like I understand like there's hierarchies of systems, but like what do you mean when you say like what criteria need to be met such that one individual has greater power than another individual? Like on this view you're presenting a power.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the ability to cause a negative outcome, maybe. Sorry, I've never actually thought about this in terms of like a rule. So, yeah, I think we can go with that. So, like the ability for one individual to cause a negative outcome for another individual. I think there's also power over.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that if that's your criteria for power, the ability to cause a negative outcome to another, then I don't know why it would be very hard or rare for a non-white individual to be racist toward a white individual, because I think it's very common that people have the potential, all sorts of people have the potential to cause negative outcomes toward others. There's many different ways one can do that.
Well, so I mean, like, if I come up to you with a gun and shoot you,
or punch someone, or do all sorts of things. I mean, there's so many different ways an individual can have a negative outcome toward another person, and all that they need to do is do it in a prejudiced way. And I don't see why they would meet the power plus prejudice criteria on an individual level.
Yeah, I definitely see that, and that's why I'm kind of, again, I'm not sure I gave the best definition. I would say, that negative outcome has to be like the activity has to be done through like systematic power, but I understand that's like a really nebulous term. It doesn't mean anything.
Wait, yeah. but then okay, so wait, hold on. So now we're saying it's not power, but it's systematic power. So presumably we want some sort, or you may be wanting to have some sort of way where you can say, well, actually, I want to define power differently, because if I just say power, then, just about everyone can have power. If you're just defining it as ability to cause a negative outcome, then just about every non-white person has that ability to cause a negative outcome if they just perform the correct action to do so.
Yeah. Well, so actually, sorry. Let me backtrack. And again, I apologize for not having a clear view on this. I am, this isn't something I think about all that often, to be honest. But I think if a black person comes up to me and shoots me because I'm white, that's probably racist. So
Okay.
Yeah, I think my definition is fine. I just so
But wait, then how? But then you agree that it's not hard. Certainly, I mean, you said earlier that you didn't use the right word when you said hard. You said it rare. But then that just comes down to an empirical question of how many non-white people shoot white people on the basis of them being white, in terms of how rare it is.
Yeah, which I don't think is a lot. Like, I don't think a lot of people are shot because they're white by black people. That seems really rare.
Okay, I haven't looked in the empirical nature of that. It's certain, but you certainly would agree that it's not hard.
No, yeah, sorry. Hard was the wrong word. Rare is the word.
So we agree that it's okay. So no, this is good. We're making progress. So we agree that it's not hard for a non-white person to be racist toward a white person. We agree on that.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And then there's a question of like, okay, is it common, or rare, or I guess that would just depend on what you consider common or rare. Well, let me just ask you this: do you think the other way around is also rare?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Now I don't have a position.
Sorry. Let me clarify that. I think relatively not rare, right? Like, if we talk about, there's like millions of interactions between white people and non-white people every day. So like, ultimately it's rare because it's probably like less than 1% of 1%. But if we compare that, like, white with non-white and non-white with white, in terms of that kind of racism, then it is rare. Sorry, does that make sense? Or that was not very well explained.
Yeah, could you just say that again? Like, here's my question. Like, here's my ultimate question. Like, it seems like, okay, so you want to say, okay, I agree it's not hard, but it is rare. My question to you is, do you think the other way around is also rare? So in other words, do you think, like, relative to whites being racist to non-whites, do you think that's more common than non-whites being racist to whites?
Both are rare on an absolute term.
But you think that one is more common than the other relative to each other?
Yeah, much more common, yes.
Okay. Now, I don't have an issue with that view. I don't know if that's true. I haven't looked at the empirical data. I mean, I guess they're intuitions. Do you have any empirical data to? I mean, it's just going to come down. That's just going to come down to the empirical data on, like, comparing the two.
I'm not sure, like, really good empirical data exists for this. Now, I mean, so we can look at, like, so right, when someone, and this is kind of the issue I think we're going to run into, is when someone gets pulled over for a traffic stop, how do we determine why they were pulled over? You know what I mean? Like, or if someone kills someone, how do we determine whether that's racist or not? And so, I think the logic I'd use to come to my conclusion is something along the lines of, there aren't a lot of, and this, forgive me if this comes off wrong, but there aren't a lot of, like, negative perceptions about white people created in the media, right? There's not this kind of quote unquote scary black man, like figure that is portrayed in news.
Well, I mean, so there are some. I mean, they're not so, like, for example, like redneck, for example. Like, there's redneck stereotypes.
But those aren't. I would argue that those aren't necessarily white stereotypes as much as they're class stereotypes. Like, I don't think we make fun of redneck because they're white. I think we make fun of redneck people because they're classist. And like, so I actually was discussing with someone the history of the term cracker the other day, right? In the classic N word.
What do you think white trash means? Like, do you think that's like do you think that has nothing to do with the fact that they're white? Why people call like certain groups of people white trash, or?
Yeah, no, not. I don't think it has really anything to do with why they're white. I think it maybe a little, but I think the majority of that is classist, and that like, so again, if we go back to like the origin of the word cracker, right? That was something that colonialists called settlers in Virginia. So it was like rich white people calling poor white people that. And I think if we look at like the majority of people who are creating media narratives and like stereotypes and things like that are white. And so when we look at like negative stereotypes against poor white people, they're generally created by rich white people.
Can I just ask you a question? Like, let's say, like, so you want to say that there aren't really any perceptions of like that target individuals that are white on the basis of their race. It's really just their class. But in terms of non-white people, that is the case. And when we give examples of white trash, people living in trailer parks, these Southerners that go out with their guns and everything like that, all the like the typical like Billy Bob stereotypes and whatnot. You want to say, well, that's just class. And I agree that they generally do tend to be lower socioeconomic class. I just don't see how we're making the determination that it's mostly socioeconomic or it's overwhelmingly socioeconomic and it has no racial role to play. Is there any
the development of those stereotypes didn't have a racial construction. It was.
Well, I'm not interested in the development of the stereotypes. I'm interested in the way they're used now, right? Like, because that would just be that would just be like similar to like an entomological fallacy, right?
Context of words.
I mean, it's not really, because it's like that has to do with words, but in other words, like you can have a word that's developed that has nothing to do with race, but can be eventually co-opted racially and then used primarily racially, and then someone saying like, oh, well, this is actually not racist because the development of the word was non-racial, even though but that wouldn't fly because it's clearly used racially now.
Not the word, like just the word, the development of the negative connotation of the word. So like,
yeah, but that's the same problem, right? Because even if the development of the negative connotation, a term can have a development of the negative connotation, could be class, and then eventually co-opted for racial purposes. Like, for example, imagine this going the other way. Like, imagine there were non-white individuals and there was some word that was a classist word, and then eventually over time it became co-opted and it was really not really used as much classist, or it was only used classist in the conjunction with that race. Like, clearly we would say like, okay, there's a clear element of racial prejudice here, even though there may not have been an element of racial prejudice at the inception of the negative connotation. It's clearly been developed into that at this point. Those two things aren't incompatible.
I still think like the way that, I guess the if we look at like the word cracker, or we look at the word like white trash, whichever kind of poor white person word you want to take.
I think white trash is a good example, actually.
We use the term white trash. If that's developed by white people to call poor white people, and now it's used, right? It's definitely used by all races and is very specific to white people. But ultimately, when you look at someone and you call them white trash, the defining thing is that they're poor. Whereas like if you look at some of the kind of slurs, right, that we use or that people use for other races, they're generally not based on whether they're poor. It's just
okay. So can I quickly interrupt? So the defining term is not just poor. It's a conjunction, right? Generally there's two things in the term white trash. There's number one, there is low socioeconomic status, and number two, them being white. And this is very indisputable because you don't hear people who are low socioeconomic status but not white being called white trash. Like, you just don't see it.
Yeah, but
The defining term is a conjunction of two things. It's not
sure,
one or the other.
but like the negative connotation in the phrase comes from the socioeconomic level.
I think it comes from both. It seems like
I would disagree.
It seems like there's a specific. Well, here's the thing. Like, okay, well then, if we disagree with that, then why? Like, what is your reasoning for why you think the negative connotation, as presently used, is only about the class and it's not about the race?
I guess I'm not. I almost see it as kind of like obvious, and so I'm trying to think of like my internal logic. So give me 1 second.
Sure.
Here.
Okay. I mean, I could just tell you why I mean, when I see the word
used, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, when I see the word used, or hear people use that word, that term, the way they seem to do it, it's a disgust. It seems to be a disgust with two things. Really, just the conjunction of what those two criteria are met. They're disgusted with these individuals who are in trailer parks, who are living in those conditions. It's also used as a sort of disgust for that in conjunction with being white. It seems to be of the conjunction together that makes the disgust.
Yeah, so I guess I don't really see that because there's a disgust with. So like if we look at that conjunction, the white trash conjunction, and we take away being white and they're just poor, there's still an animus against that.
Sure, but it's not the same. It's not clearly the same one. That's why the word white trash was used. That's why it's a unique word that's used for a unique conjunction.
For sure, and it doesn't meet that criteria anymore. But there's still animus, right? We take away the word, or we take away the trash part.
Wait, but that's not incompatible. Yeah, but that's not even if you take away the the white part of it, there's still be an animus. That's not incompatible with there being a racial component to it. Like, there could be, even if the reverse wasn't true, even if you took away the socioeconomic part and there wasn't animus, it still wouldn't follow that the term is not racial in any way or any significant way. Like, it's not entailed. It doesn't follow. It could be we could grant what you're saying right now. It still wouldn't follow.
I'm not sure that's the case. Like if I'm, let's go back to kind of what we're talking about, right? Like and I think we got off on this, right, with a cop and their kind of prejudice, right? Or sorry, and correct me if I'm wrong there, but if a cop sees a poor white person and says, okay, white trash, I'm going to, stop and frisk that person, then the reason they did that is because of the socioeconomic status of that person, not the white status of that person, right? If you take away,
well, I can grant that, but that's not what I'm talking about now. Like, I'm talking about the usage of the word white trash, right? Because I think when I hear that word used, the vibe I get off, what it seems to me, what the people are disgusted with that conjunction. They're disgusted with the conjunction of that type of low socioeconomic status, usually with an additional conjunction of being like less intelligent, less educated, in addition to being white. Like, on those those things in conjunction, like, result in a specific type of disgust. Now, you seem to want to respond to that by saying, well, actually, what the majority of the disgust is not the racial component of that. And if you want to show that, then simply showing that disgust would still be there if you remove the racial component, but a different type of disgust, that wouldn't get you to that conclusion. That's all I'm saying.
I don't necessarily think it's like a different type of disgust. I think the disgust between like a poor black person in a rundown project is very, very similar to a redneck in a trailer park in Alabama. I think those kind of the disgust with the sanitary conditions, the disgust with what they eat, the disgust with all that is extremely similar. So I guess that's where I'm coming from, is like when someone brings up those two situations there, I see a lot of similarities.
Okay, can I just ask you this? Like, let's say there was an equivalent word for non-white, like non-white trash, right? Like, let's say someone said that, and they tried to make the same argument back to you. They said, "Oh, by non-white trash, I just really mean something disgusting about the low socioeconomic status. So it's really not like a racial thing. You understand? Like if I said that, would you, and like would you be like persuaded by that?
I mean, in a vacuum, possibly. In actual use, probably not, because I think the conflation of that word with just the Black population at large would probably be bigger, right? Like if we think about, like, let's use the term welfare queen, for example, right? So like welfare queen is what they called the Ronald Reagan's classic, like Chicago, right? That got conflated with like all Black people, right? Whereas like white trash doesn't get conflated with all white people. Like no one calls me white trash. I mean, maybe people do and I don't realize it, but like I don't think of many people call me white trash. Whereas like I think there are plenty of like
Wait, what gets conflated with all Black people on your view?
Like the term welfare queen.
Right? I don't think. You think that term gets conflated with all Black people?
Yeah, absolutely. Like when
really, like even the rich ones.
Not by me, but by people. Yeah, absolutely. Like when, like if there are people who, if they are shopping, right, and they see a Black person with like steak and lobster, they're like, oh, welfare must be nice. Like that is a reaction. It's not right.
I mean, there are some. I mean, I guess you could find some examples, but then I'm sure you could find some examples of like individuals who think all white people are white trash. I mean, do you have like data on like if there's a difference in frequency of this happening, or?
I mean, like obviously not, right?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm just not seeing a symmetry breaker here.
But I've never heard a wealthy white person I've never heard anyone who wasn't like explicitly white trash called white trash, except for like a one-off one-liner in Wedding Crashers, right? Whereas like I've heard a lot of, and again, anecdote, right? So I don't have any data, but I think it is much more common for people to conflate like the term welfare queen, which I think is as close as we can get to the equivalent. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong there, with all Black people. So again, maybe we're at an impasse because I don't have any like meta-analyses of how people perceive the word welfare.
Well, I'm not asking for a meta-analysis. I would just ask for,
or just even one analysis. Yeah, even one. I was just speaking in hyperbolic. But yeah, I don't have anything. It'd be really interesting to give people pictures of the range of classes of the two and say, do you think this word fits? But yeah, no, okay. I would guess that it would come down that way.
So is there the reason you believe this is just is anecdotal, essentially? It's just how you've encountered these words being used.
Yeah, and maybe how I interpret the words too. Like or not how I.
Well, the question isn't about how you interpret it, right? The question is about how it's being used.
For sure. Well, and yeah, how I've seen it used. Sure, then yes, that's where it's coming from.
Okay, but you certainly do acknowledge that there are words and there are phrases that are used that can be and are used in a racist way against virtually every race, right? Including white people.
Sure, but I would argue that, again, most, if not all, of the racist words towards white people are at least based somewhat, right? Like even if I grant that white trash is mostly racial, it still has an element to it of socioeconomics. And I think almost all white slurs do, right? Cracker, I can't really think of any other ones. But whereas if you look at like the N-word, right? Or like I'm not going to repeat a bunch of racial slurs, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Then those tend to be applied to the entire group, whether it's, and everywhere from a CEO to someone in the project.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there aren't like individuals or how frequently. But I mean, I guess even if I grant that, I mean, the purpose of just going into this is just to say, like, you seem to have this belief. You seem to have this belief that, there are. So we agreed when we got into this. We agreed that it's not hard for non-whites to be racist toward whites. What we wanted to say is that there is a difference in relative frequency, to which presumably substantial, in the relative probability of a non-white being racist toward a white and vice versa, right? Yeah. And I just want to, now here's the thing, like, that could be the case. I could grant that. I don't know. Just to be clear to the audience, I don't, the reason I'm taking the agnostic view on this is because I haven't seen data. And I could be, you could be right, you could be wrong. I just want to know why you form that belief if you don't have data, or maybe you do have data, in which case I'd be happy to read it. Like, is yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's definitely data saying that if we look at like positions of power in society, so specifically people with authority, hiring authority, and just authority at work in general, we look at people who create perceptions on television. We look at police officers. We look at, I haven't looked at the data, but I would suspect TSA agents probably as well. That overwhelmingly those are white versus black. So if we're looking at like the total number of interactions between white and non-white, where the white person is in a position of power that would give them the ability to, be racist very easily. So like, I think there's a difference between when a white person who is a police officer stops a non-white person, and when a white person who's just a citizen meets a non-white person on the street, in terms of like the probability of there being a racist interaction. Because while yes, the white person on the street has the power to punch the non-white person or shoot the non-white person and cause a negative outcome, that's, I think, exceedingly rare, right? Like physical violence is really rare overall, whereas like, I guess you could call it like systemic violence of, police interactions with non-white people are a lot more common, and white people, right? Going either way. So if we look at like number of people in power, those tend to be white. Which,
well, you'd have to show disproportionately, right? I mean, so here's the thing. So if we want to, here's the original question. The original question is which group is racial interacting in a racist way more commonly than the other that you want to show. Now, I'll just point out that just showing that one group is disproportionately in positions of power more than the others actually doesn't show that, because remember, you want to define racism as a conjunction between power and prejudice, right? So if it just so happens to be that they're disproportionately more powerful but disproportionately less prejudice, then it still wouldn't come out to be the case that one group was disproportionately more racist than the other than not. Right. So what you'd have to show is two things. You have to show either some combination of the following. You have to show that one group, and this goes either way. If you want to show that there's an asymmetry, you'd have to show that one group is disproportionately in a position of more power, and either and that's not made up for by any decrease in disproportionality of prejudice. Like, that's what you'd have to show.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think both those things exist. So the power one, I don't think is really, I think is pretty clear, right? Like if we look at the amount of managers, people in the position to hire, we look at the number of like police and the number of people who create media, just those three, they're overwhelmingly white. And then politicians. Let's conclude politicians because they create laws, and that's important. So we look at those four. Those are overwhelmingly white. So I think I've met or at least the evidence meets that first criteria.
Well, and maybe this is just a topic I haven't done the empirical work on. So if we're looking at, first I'd imagine we need a broader category than that, because there are many different positions of power. And we'd have to have that relative to like the population percentage and whatnot. So, I mean, that could be true. I don't know. I would be interested in seeing data for that. But then we'd also, so I'm interested in data for that. I'm also interested in data in terms of like frequency of prejudice in these interactions, because you do need both to make that case, right?
Yeah, yep, for sure. No, I think I can agree with that as a framework, and so I'm comfortable saying if the data exists for the first one, then that's met, because I'm from everything I've seen, the data is pretty overwhelming that and again, I narrowed it to those four because those are the four I've seen the data from. Okay. There are, like you said, other categories of people in power that, for all I know, the data may be completely the opposite, and so that could fail. But I'm comfortable with
okay.
that.
Okay, and you'll send me that data, and we can review it and maybe come back. But then like you would also
sure.
need
I don't have to find it. I can probably find some though.
Okay,
but yeah.
And then you would also need the data on prejudice relative.
And so believe it or not, I am getting to that. So there's been studies on implicit bias, where for example, they show pictures of people to other people, and they rate the trustworthiness, I think, and the innocence, or I don't know, probably pretty nebulous concept, but they rate like those items, and then there's other ones that rate like the physical size and age. There's a whole bunch of different ones, and at least from what I've seen, generally the lighter the skin, the more trustworthy that people have rated them. Additionally, if we look at
are you are you familiar with like the criticisms of implicit association tests?
I'm not talking about like I take an implicit association test and it's it tells me my implicit biases. I'm saying like when we look at like large numbers of people viewing pictures of other people, these are the trends we see. So yeah, not individual tests. I agree, those are bad. But I'm saying like if I tell 1,000 people to look at 1,000 pictures and they rate the trustworthiness, like the population stats of those.
Right. No, I understand that. I just don't see how that's. How are you using that differently than one of these, like for example, like the Harvard implicit bias test, for example, like is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something that's different? Because like there was a lot of controversy about those kind of tests. Like for example, one of the criticisms is that like, well, basically you're not really tracking for any prejudice. You're just tracking for like implicit trust by familiarity. Yeah, go ahead.
I believe the study is controlled for race. So,
wait, what?
So if you have 1,000 people viewing 1,000 other faces, right, and you look at the stats, you would expect that if you expect the white people to rate the white people more trustworthy, the black people to black people more trustworthy.
Not necessarily, but not necessarily to the same degree, right? Because if you're just proxying for familiarity, if you're talking about two populations that one is a very large percentage of population, one's a very lower percentage of population, you would expect more frequent white interactions rather than black interactions. Like in other words, a black person's more likely to see a white face than a white person would be more likely to see than a white person would be likely to see a black face. So even in that case, you would expect non-white people to be more familiar with white people than white people would be familiar with black people, and you would still expect some asymmetries on those tests from that alone.
So again, I'm not really that familiar with the studies, to be honest with you. That's not something you think we could control for?
I am not sure how you would. I mean, well, there are. I don't know how you would control for it in this methodology. There are better methodologies. I think the whole methodology would be reframed if I were to try to do a study that would control for that. Like one thing I think is good. I think, and I think they just missed the mark here. But like one thing I think was a great idea was like the have you heard of these tests where they give the what's it called, the like a resume, right? They give a resume to someone who's going to hire someone, and then they give
I was actually that was going to be my second point on this topic.
Yeah. So they randomly give resumes with the same exact scores and everything, the same exact like qualifications, and one is like and one's an obviously sounding white name, and one's an obviously sounding non-white name, right? And I think that's in most cases the right approach because it's randomized, it's controlled, and you're controlling for all other variables except for the name, and you're using the name as a proxy for race. The only problem really is that what they didn't control for really is socioeconomic status, and they'll say, okay, well, the socioeconomic status is tied into race, but like that still doesn't address the issue. Like, here's a way to make it better. The way to make it better is like, instead of if you were to equate the socioeconomic implication in the name. So, for example, if you're going to use a name like Jamal, right, and you're going to use you should really, on the white person side, accompany it by a name like Billy Bob, right? Just to signify that they're both from associated with low socioeconomic statuses.
Well, isn't the association of traditionally black names with socioeconomic status in a form of implicit bias?
No, see, that's the thing. Like, it could be, but you're trying to design an experiment that teases out that. You're trying to design an experiment that teases, like, just looks at, okay, if we hold everything else equal, right? If everything else is held equal, then is there any statistically significantly more frequent hiring for one over the other just based on race as a variable? Once you introduce a confounder like socioeconomic status, you replying and saying, well, maybe socioeconomic status is racially motivated. Well, now you're just, well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. You don't know the reason why they're doing that unless you control for it.
Well,
right.
But so whether the reason is that that the people reading the resumes are like, no, I'm not going to call this people because they're black, or no, I'm not going to call this people because they're poor because they're black. I don't think.
Well, no. It may not just be that they're poor because they're black. They're just they may be just not calling them because they're poor.
Poor because they have a black name.
Well, okay,
but that's the implication, right?
Okay, but here's the thing then. Like, if that's also equally true for white individuals, because they have a specific type of they have a specific type of white name that is also poor, right? And they're poor because they're redneck, for example, for an example. Like, yeah, you could make a case of being like, you can try to make a case like, okay, well, that's maybe racist as well, because they're being racist against rednecks. And even though we haven't controlled for the socioeconomic variable, we can just say they're not hiring them because they're low socioeconomic because they were a redneck, right? Like, yeah, I guess you can make an argument like that. It wouldn't really be as convincing if what you're really trying to show is you're adjusting for appropriate variables and trying to show like, okay, no, the reason they're doing this is because of they don't like these individuals because of their race or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar. Do you know, in those studies, and I'm not, you may not know, do you know how they chose the names? Like how they chose, or the black names versus the white names?
I'm not sure if they elaborate on the reason why they chose the names they did. And by the way, Chad is like bringing up certain studies. Just so we're clear, Chad, do you guys think that is a study that actually does address this? Like is there a study that actually compares like Tyrone to Billy Bob or something? Like what's the study, Brent? The NBER paper? Okay, I pulled that up. I have that up here. So what was the methodology? Like what? How, can you just, so I don't have to read through it all, like Bryn, just like you can come on voice if you want. Like explain what exactly they did. Yeah.
So you're referring to the infamous like Ben Watson problem, where like Ben Watson was a quote unquote black name, and
well, I mean, I'm not. The only problem I'm referring to here is that the type of name, the implications from the two names are not the same in terms of in the reason they're not the same is because they introduce more variables than race alone in different ways. Like that's the problem I'm getting at. So in one case, a given name is associated with race plus socioeconomic status X, and race Z plus socioeconomic status X, and the other one is associated with race A and socioeconomic status W or something. Like what we really want is to equate the two socioeconomic status variables, and so have a name that is associated with the same type of socioeconomic status variable, and does not have the same racial association. Like that's what we're looking for.
So Avi, I'm looking to say is that so to decide on which names are uniquely African American, which are uniquely white, using name frequency data calculated from birth certificates of all babies born in Massachusetts between 1970.
Yeah, so that's really what you don't want to do, right? Because like that's not a way to adjust for the that's not a way to get to that adjustment of variables.
Well, so I'm like I guess I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not great at like I've never designed an experiment, so I may be missing something here. But like if we're looking
I can tell you what's missing. I can tell you exactly what's missing.
You know, and I understand that, but this is why I think it kind of is included. So if we're looking at all names during like a certain amount of time, that should include both, you know, low socioeconomic white names and high socioeconomic white names, and low socioeconomic black names and high socioeconomic black names.
Yeah. So, yeah, and you would want to put the two against, like you would want to compare here. Like here's what you want to compare. Like you would want to compare a name that sounds that is associated with being white and is associated with being a high socioeconomic status. You would want to pick a name that is associated with being black and associated with high socioeconomic status, and you would want to compare those. And you'd then want to compare, and then you'd want to say, okay, what about a name that is associated with with being white and low socioeconomic status, and a name associated with being black and being associated with low economic status, and you'd want to compare that.
But you mind if I just do the like overview that I think I cut out on again?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Bryn.
Yeah, so that NBER paper from 2003 did test that specific hypothesis. So they use names like Jamal, Tyrone, Lakeisha, versus like actually like socioeconomically like normal or like higher end names in the like quote unquote white category. So they were using, you know, stereotypical names like you know, Stephen or Ben or whatever. And what they found is that there was a directional but not statistically significant bias. So it leaned towards the idea that there was like some sort of like class inference going on, but not one that like demonstrated that was overcoming or was like the sole explainer.
Can you show me where in the paper this is, Bryn?
I don't have it open. I can, if you give me like 10 minutes, I can get back to my computer. And then I'll also point out too that there's an analysis from Killian et al. Who go over this problem too.
Wait, but is this just an interaction test or something? Is this just like an interaction test that's being used to see like how much that made a difference, or is there any like? Because here's the question, Bryn. Like what I'm trying to get at here is, because I understand you can do certain like interaction tests to see if like there was like some like thing up, even if not statistically significant, approaching statistically significant. But what I am in that case, I would want to see if like you could do an adjustment. I don't even know how you would do an adjustment for that to see how much of the results are attenuated. But really, what you want really what you would want. Really, you would want is still not that. What really you would want is just the methodology itself from the get-go. Just say, okay, listen, here is a name that is, you know, is associated with race X, is associated with socioeconomic status Y. Compare that to here's a name that's associated with race Z and associated with socioeconomic status Y. Okay, and just like bake all that into the methodology from the get-go instead of trying to do like these post hoc tests to try to correct for like errors in the methodology. Like, is there anything like that anywhere?
No, there's nothing like that clearly, and so that's like one of the big issues. So I also posted there's a 2020 meta-analysis and a 2020 literature overview from Killian et al. They published 2 different studies in October of last year, and they talk about how that is one of the issues, is that the thing that you're talking about right now, there's these sort of like post hoc analyses that you're talking about, and these analyses that have sort of like an inferential comparison back from like 2003 till now. But there's nothing quite at the level of what you're talking about. And so they recommend doing that moving forward in the literature. One thing too that I was going to mention, but I got cut off, was that these kinds of studies, like the NBER paper, I don't have all of the ones that do this sort of attempted correction like you're talking that you want or that I'm talking about. But the trend has been as like racial stereotypes have begun to normalize over the past like 20 years, the effect size leans more towards like what you're talking about, where there's sort of like a class distinction going on rather than a racial distinction. So there's a growing shift in the marketplace. But you're right that one of the big problems, as noted by Killian and others, is that nothing quite to the standard you're talking about exists right now.
And what exactly was done? Because I'm looking through this NBER paper to try to like tease that out, and I'm not finding it. And maybe this is just because it's a long paper and I haven't found it yet, which is probably
I mean, so mostly people point to this sort of like post hoc to support against what you're talking about. They're just using names that don't fall prey to it explicitly. They're not using any kind of like replacement analysis or anything like that. The big thing that you're talking about is there's sort of like some infamous papers with like these huge like disparities or no disparities at all that use, depending on like which way you want to go, that use names like Ben Watson or like racially ambiguous or class ambiguous names. The difference with this paper and why people point to it is just because the names that they were using, like Lakeisha, Lamar, Tyrone, etc., those don't fall as prey to the objection. But that's just an inference, right?
So wait, I just want to be clear about what's being said. Are you saying that names like Lakeisha or Tyrone wouldn't be associated with low socioeconomic status?
No. So like what I'm saying is that what they point out in this study is that there's not much of a difference between the cases where they use names like that and cases where they are using like less socioeconomically like maligned names in the paper. I forget what the ones that they use.
Which ones were those papers? Yeah, which ones were that? Because that's what I'm asking for, right? Like that's what.
And what I'm saying is that this paper didn't explicitly, if I remember correctly, didn't explicitly test that hypothesis. It's just pointed.
Wait, then how are they making the claim that there's not much difference than when that hypothesis is tested?
Right, and then that's what I'm saying is that one of the big issues, as pointed out in like the most recent meta-analysis by Killian, is that nothing of the specific like type of study that you're asking for is done well yet.
Wait, but then why is it being claimed that there's no big difference in terms of when names are used that don't fall prey to that? Like maybe I'm just confused about what's being said here, but I don't understand how the claim can be made that it doesn't make a difference when these names that don't fall prey to having the assumption of low socioeconomic status. I don't see how they can claim that doesn't make a difference when those studies haven't been done.
Yeah,
unless they have been done, and I'm not aware of the studies. But then in that case, show them to me.
I think that like the way that I would want to look at it is more like there's not good evidence in like either direction that there is some kind of socioeconomic like bias or some kind of mediating factor going on there or not. I don't know that there's like a clear trend one way or the other. So I think that like part of the point is that reporting or using field studies in an argument in either direction is sort of untenable to me. Like I'm not sure that they're conducted at like a good enough level for like either side to claim that it supports
But do you see my like what? Okay, Bryn, I just want to like, because it's like what I'm trying to figure out what the NBER paper actually said that's anything sort of what you've said, that they've tried to like Can you just show me where in the paper they've tried to like address this issue and said like and made the claim that it wouldn't have made a difference by any substantial degree or something like that? Did they?
You guys keep talking for 5 minutes, and I'll find parts of the paper that I'm thinking about, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay. I mean, because this is really just the heart of the issue, and I just want to know why they. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I still think like even if we don't control for that, I still think this is telling of prejudice. Like if when we think about
well, I agree it's prejudice, Charles. I mean, I agree it's some form of prejudice. The question is, what is it prejudiced on the basis of? Like, it could be just prejudice on the basis of low socioeconomic status, like per se, and that's it.
Yeah, but if we're linking, if we say, okay, the common names that we think about when, the most common Black names people assume are low socioeconomic status, the internal link there between the name and the low socioeconomic status is that they're Black names. So it's still prejudice against Black people if that's the most common names for them.
Wait, but if that is, would you say that even if it's the case where it's more where names associated?
In a world where 100% of the difference is explainable by that relation to socioeconomic status, I think it's still prejudice because it's still,
and by prejudice you mean they're doing it on the basis of race.
Yeah, because they're thinking, okay, like name X is a Black name, therefore name X is low socioeconomic status.
And you would say that's racist, even if that's a completely valid inference.
What so if all Lakeishas and all Tyrones and all Jamals are actually poor?
Yeah.
I mean, all Jamals, all Lakeishas, and all Tyrones aren't.
I know they aren't, but that's not the question I'm asking, right? So the question I'm asking is,
I'm misunderstanding that.
Yeah. What I'm trying to get at is, there's a distinction between saying something is racist just because it uses the race of a person to make an inference, versus something is racist simply because it uses the race of a person to make an invalid inference, right? So in the case, so let's say hypothetically, if all people with name X that is associated with race Y have socioeconomic status A. If someone says all X's are Y's and all Y's are A's, therefore all X's are A's. So if someone makes that inference, right? Would you say that is a racist inference? If one of those races are like non-white or something?
Yeah, I think so. Because sorry, and let me summarize, just make sure I'm understanding. So if X's tend to be A's, right? And so you see an X and you say it's an A. I think that is still racist. Am I understanding right?
So, sorry, I'm sorry. Just can you repeat that again?
Yeah. So if X's tend to be A.
No. Right. I'm not saying if X's tend to be A. I'm saying hypothetically if all X's are A. I'm saying all, not tend to be. So if we have a hypothetical world where all X's are Y's and all Y's are A's, right? Or we can just say
that's not racist. Sorry.
So in that case, if it was the case that all Tyrones were low socioeconomic status, and someone makes the inference that this individual is Tyrone, therefore this individual must be low socioeconomic status, you would not say that's racist. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's just like there's a fact and attributed. Yeah,
okay.
So no.
Now, if it just so happens to be that the overwhelming majority of people named Tyrone are low socioeconomic status, and someone makes the inference and says this individual is named Tyrone, and therefore they are more likely than not to be low socioeconomic status, would you consider that inference racist?
So it depends. If the internal link between the two has to do with what the name Tyrone kind of gives as a connotation for race, then no. If we're talking about like Bryn mentioned the race neutral name Ben Watson. So if all Ben Watson, or if the majority of Ben Watsons were poor, and you heard Ben Watson and you think, okay, poor, that's not racist. But if you hear the name Tyrone and you think, okay, Black, therefore low socioeconomic status, then yeah, that's probably racist.
Even if the well, let's just cut like it's the heart of the issue here. Like, let's say hypothetically, the overwhelming majority of Black individuals wore low socioeconomic status. And I don't have the data on the socioeconomic status, but I'm just saying, let's just stipulate hypothetically that that's the case. If someone makes the inference, this individual is Black, therefore it is likely that this individual is low socioeconomic status, would you consider that inference racist?
I mean, as long as they include the likely and act accordingly, then no. But if they assume,
but then
so
but then you see the problem then, right? Because then you don't. The problem is, how do we know that these individuals seeing names like Tyrone in those hiring tests, they're not just doing that very inference and using that on the basis of hiring? Because then you wouldn't be able to show that that's prejudice in a racist way.
Yeah, okay, I do see that point. That's a good point. Sorry it took me so long to get here. Yeah, no, that is a good point. Wait a second. Because I'm trying to. Sorry, I'm not as good as Lee's. Like, this implies this, therefore that implies that. So, yeah, no, that's a good point. I do see. Yeah, because it's not. So you're saying that necessarily. So they hear the name Tyrone. They don't think. They don't necessarily think Tyrone, therefore Black name, therefore poor. They hear the name Tyrone and they think therefore poor. There's not that, like.
Well, not therefore poor. Therefore more likely to.
Yeah. Therefore more likely. Yeah. But there's not necessarily that image in their head or that thought of they're Black and therefore they're poor. It's
right.
Okay. Yeah. I do see that.
Okay, and that's really what we're trying to tease out, because if that's the case, then that inference in and of itself, it doesn't strike you or me as racist. It just strikes me and you presumably as well as just a valid inference. It's just describing a probability.
Yeah. No, that does make sense. Thank you for walking me through that. That took me a little while. I think it's going to be hard though to determine. Yeah, and now I see what you mean by the three, like grouping the three names.
Before we move on, maybe I'll just come in to clarify the NBER paper, what it did. I'm kind of busy right now, so either I can like very quickly go over this, or if you want, it's only a couple of paragraphs long, and they mention the relevant tables. But section 5.1 is the part that goes over your concerns, where they test and normalize against socioeconomic backgrounds and maternal education levels, and that's where they make their argument that it's normalized against the idea that you're trying to present.
Sorry, 1 second. So we're going into 5.1.
Yeah.
Is it which section in 5.1, Bryn?
Page 20
in the NBR paper. Yeah, I don't know. But
page 20. And but we're in section 5. Like, what am I looking at specifically? Which paragraph?
Just like literally the first I think 5 paragraphs go over that confound in particular.
Okay, how did they adjust for it?
So they tested and normalized it against socioeconomic background of those names as like an average rate. So they basically were like stratifying like each name, both the white names. There's like a list of like 10 names for like each racial and gender categories, so like 10 African male, 10 African female. And then they basically stratify each of those names out into like some kind of background rate for maternal education and some kind of background rate for average income. And then from that, what they do is they test whether or not there's some kind of relationship between just those factors and callbacks. And I believe that they deny that hypothesis, and that there's not a linear trend between those features. And then they compare them as well as like categories from race, between race and also between gender.
Okay, I'm just gonna. So the row label average contains the average fractional. Okay, overall contains the average fractional mothers with us. Okay, well, that's not where it is. Okay, between name heterogeneity and social background. African named babies named Kenya or Jamal are affected with much higher, are affiliated with much higher mother's education than African American babies named Latoya or Leroy. Conversely, white babies named Carrie or Neil have lower social background than those named Emily or Joffrey. This allows us for a direct test of the social background hypothesis in our example. So are you saying that they're going to pit, say, Carrie and Neil against Kenya and Jamal, and then compare Latoya and Leroy against Emily and Joffrey? Is that what's being said?
So
Okay.
they do two tests, right? So they do.
Well, let's just talk about that one. Let's just, before we get into the second one, let's talk about that one. So, what I'm interested in, because I could be, this is just an intuition I have, because I don't see the names Kenya and Jamal as associated with an equivalent. Sorry, as Latoya and Leroy as equivalently associated with an socioeconomic status as Emily and Joffrey. Like I can see the name Jamal and Billy Bob associated with like a similar socioeconomic status, but like just off the bat, it doesn't strike me as a similar socioeconomic status. Now, is there like data showing that really is this a very similar socioeconomic status or something like that?
Yeah, that's what they did, right? Is they were quantifying it rather than qualifying it. So it's based on income and also motherhood attainment of education.
What were those for those names? Is there like?
Oh, I don't have the data. I don't have the paper open. I'm doing something right now. You can. They mentioned the tables that are relevant. I think it's 6, 7, and 11 that are the relevant tables for the.
I'm just gonna see what correction. They do. In last revelation, we report that the rank order. Oh, they did a rank order. They just did a rank order correlation. That's not actually right. But that's not doing that. That's just doing the rank order, saying like, okay, well, this is. I mean, am I going crazy right now?
No, you're right, and that's what I was saying is that this paper tested the hypothesis. It's what people point to. I agree with you that the evidence isn't strong.
Wait, but hold on, like Bryn, because you can like, let's just say that. I mean, here's what I'm not clear on, because let's just say that, like, let's say we have some metric for socioeconomic status, right? And let's just say it's like 1 to 100, right? Now, let's say that we have a name that such as Jamal and Kenya, and then we have names like Leroy and Latoya. And let's just say Jamal and Kenya are at like 10 out of 100. And let's just say Latoya and Leroy, they're a bit higher. They're like 20. But you can have names like Carrie and Neil that can be 50, and Emily and Joffrey can be 70, right? And it's true that, relative to Emily and Joffrey, Carrie and Neil are lower. But if you compare Carrie and Neil to Latoya and Leroy, that's still a crazy comparison, right? And doing a rank order, I'm not sure how that does that resolve this? Like
no, and that's my point is that I think that they cast doubt or suspicion on it, but it's not a quantitative suspicion, because although they're quantifying the data rather than what I think the kind of test that you want that would actually test. For one, I think you would want some kind of qualifying and some kind of interpretation of those names test. That's not just like this post hoc analysis. You're right that they end up getting something that is insufficient for completely denying it. I think one of the things that's
what you can do. I mean, it could be post hoc. I mean, you could like have data on like, okay, for everyone named Jamal or Kenya, or for everyone named Leroy or Latoya, what you can do is you can say like, okay, well, what is this individual's average income? And then we could do the same thing for like Neil and Carrie and Emily and Joffrey. And then we can see like, okay, like how close they are to each other and if they're appropriate to actually compare. Like that could be done. I don't see why that couldn't be done post hoc. Is something similar to that done in this paper or any paper?
No, and so that's like the thing that I was going to get to with referencing Killian et al. Is that they point out that there's nothing of that sort that's been attempted yet. This is like this NBER paper and things like it in sort of the follow-up literature up until I think like the most recent stuff that does stuff like this is like 2017ish, has like this issue where it's sort of just doing the same sort of like rank order kind of analysis that you get here. Because one of the problems is that there's just going to be a huge like disparation between names, which you guys have already talked about. Like that's already just sort of like a background effect anyways. and so it's hard to actually get categories that you can compare easily like that. And then the other thing too is that it just seems like no one has like attempted to go for like that kind of trial that you want. And so that's something that Killian et al. Have like called on for increased research of in their 2020 meta-analysis.
Can you link that meta-analysis?
Yeah, I can actually post it. Here, one sec. I think that's the right one. In any case, the name here, I'll just spell out the name, and then you can go search. You guys can go search it up on your own time. But I'm not aware of anything that meets the standard that you explicitly want. There's only these papers that have this sort of like cast a shadow of the doubt sort of analysis.
Okay, understood. All right. I mean, because
like my bigger point was just that I'm sort of like wary to like have either side like claim that they have like good data to show it's one.
No, I claim
because there's like class reductionists who go stronger than what you're doing, right? Where they'll say it's only explained by the class analysis, and there's nothing about race. And I think that the bigger point is it's sort of like unclear in both directions.
Right. Just to be clear about what I'm doing for anyone listening, like I'm being an agnostic. That's what I'm doing.
Right.
And like, I don't know if this is based on I'm just looking at the variables that are not controlled, and I'm just saying like, okay, I don't know which variable it is, and I'm looking at the attempts to control it, and they seem pretty poor. They seem like they're not even doing stratification. They're doing a rank order test. They're not like doing stratification for well, no, they wouldn't. They're not stratifying it doesn't seem like they're stratifying a continuous variable to do this and then comparing the same categories. They're not doing like any of the even some of the methods that are used to control for confounders in some nutrition studies that I'm critical of. Like they don't even get. It doesn't seem like they've even gotten to that level.
Right. This is something that. So Killian is probably a good one to read if you actually like want to get like more well read on this. Their team has a 2017 article, and then 2 articles from 2020, both of which or all of which sort of like bring up this issue you're talking about and call for much more sensitivity in the literature on like that.
Okay. All right. And so it seems where we've left off on all of this. So it seems like okay, we agree that it is possible for in the United States and really in I think the globe, it is possible for non-whites to be racist towards whites. It is not hard. And the question of how frequently it occurs, it seems rare. And if it's rare, it seems rare in an absolute sense. And it does. And in terms of if it's rare in relation to the other way around, it seems at this point we're at agnosticism. Although we may have some may have intuitions to lean in one direction. Is that fair?
Yeah,
that's basically what the literature shows.
Okay. Well, I think I'm satisfied with that.
So, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
If do we think it's racist, or do you think it's racist if let's say the name, like because I'm looking at this and I'm seeing like, okay, Rashid, and I'm not sure what mother education actually means in this, but Rashid is associated with the highest mother's education level. So let's say probably the highest socioeconomic level. I think that's
out of what? Like it's associated with
77.3%. I think that might be
percentile of what? Is that of like non-white names used in this paper, or is that like?
Oh yeah, no, sorry, that's non-white. Yeah, non-white African American male names. That's the highest. So
okay,
let's say we find that Rashid has the highest of those African American male, and we look at from a socioeconomic standpoint. We say, okay, Rashid is a name that is generally not a low socioeconomic.
That doesn't follow. Wait, Charles. It's possible for Rashid to still be a low socioeconomic status associated name while being at the 70-something percentile of non-white names, right?
No. I'm saying let's assume we do the analysis we want to do, right? And we say, okay, Rashid. We look at like average incomes for these households, and we say, okay, Rashid is like the 50th percentile or 60th percentile or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, and you compare of all people, and then you compare it to a not a white sounding name of like also the 60th percentile, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm saying this is kind of a separate question. So this is kind of a tangent. So let's say we find Rashid as like 60%, and then we give like sorry, I'm blanking on the word. Like we ask people if like what are your connotations of the name, and most white people say lower socioeconomic status. Do you think that would be racist?
Oh, yeah. If they're just if they're saying that an individual, if they're making an association because based on their race to a low of low socioeconomic status, and that belief is false, so they don't have a sound inference. So they don't have a sound inference on the basis of race. Yeah, I would consider that racist. Sure.
Okay, cool. Then yeah, no, I actually, and now I think I'm understanding. Now that I look at this, I'm understanding more when you were describing the three buckets, how that design would be. And hopefully someone does, because it'd be really interesting to read.
But if the inference, but if the inference is valid and sound, right? If it's a sound inference, I don't consider that to be
No, and we agree on that. I just wanted to make sure we agreed kind of on the opposite version as well.
Yeah, if someone's making unsound inferences on the basis of race, yeah, I can understand why someone would consider that racist. Absolutely, sure.
Yeah, and I do agree on your characterization kind of where we're at, because I think, again, if we look at the number and power, and then the number as degree of prejudice, I guess I'm pretty sure the number and power is higher for whites versus non-whites. And I can send you some of the data. I don't have it saved, but I'll look up some and send it. And but I'm pretty sure. And then I lean, I think, based off this and also those
I'm sorry, you cut, Charles. I think you cut out.
Oh, yep. Sorry, my finger slipped. If we look at the implicit bias as well, and I know there are problems, and those problems may even kind of make it so we can't trust the studies. I still think I lean in that direction, but I think I've moved again, now that I understand the problems here, more towards your direction of agnostic than I was before, because I didn't even consider. Well, I mean, I considered it. I guess I just explained it away in a way that wasn't valid, I think is the best way to put it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I think we've come to agreement then. All right. Well, it was good talking to you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. I appreciate it, and as much as I do have some reservations about these kind of things, but I think this was really productive.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thanks for the talk. All right, take care.
Yep. Yeah, you too.